Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Council Priorities Committee meeting, and it's nice to see such a great attendance from the public here today. I'd like to begin the meeting with an acknowledgement that we are here today on the traditional territories of the Kwantlen, Katzie, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. First item of business on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Could I have a motion for that, please? Moved by Councillor Martin, second by Councillor Pratt. Any discussion on the agenda or any changes? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask for a vote, I guess, by show of hands. Is that all right? Yeah, a vote by show of hands if you accept the agenda. Great. Okay, item B, the motion that was referred to this committee from the September 11th meeting. Mr. Back and his staff going to do a presentation on this?
Thank you, Your Worship. We begin, however, with the referral itself. There was a referral by Councillor Van Popta and seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Ordinarily, we would hear from the mover and seconder as to the nature of the referral, and then from the mover of the motion themselves to determine before we get any staff commentary. Okay, so I will turn the floor over to the mover and the seconder. Councillor Pratt, did you move it, the original? Okay, Councillor Van Popta, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it to this committee so that we had the opportunity to discuss it. When this motion was brought forward, I believe there was 3 or 4 councillors missing at that meeting. So it was just an opportunity to make sure that everybody had a chance to view this important item.
And Councillor Ferguson is not here, then we'd ordinarily revert to the mover of the original motion, Councillor Pratt.
Councillor Pratt.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just before we get to any official presentation by staff on any of the items they want to present on, I took it upon myself. Calling this a presentation is generous, but I wanted to at least do have some visual aid to accompany why I thought this was an important motion to bring to the table in the first place. Just going to get into, this will be good now. Oh, there we go. Okay, so first and foremost, I grew up in Murrayville, up the hill from the airport. For me, the airport is a pretty critical piece of the identity of what the township is. I had friends who learned to fly there. I've attended a couple of events there. I've been to the museum. So for me, this motion was an exercise in future-proofing. Because I think that if we wanted to get ahead of things, now is the time to talk about them. And so that's why I brought this forward with the language that I did. And so I won't reread the whereas clauses of the motion itself, but the motion was entitled Future Land Use for Langley Regional Airport. And I wanted to see if I can't, there we go. So this is the main body of the text of the therefore part of this motion. And the parts that I've kind of put in bold and italicized here are the pieces that I want to draw people's attention to. Is a report to council on a potential timeline, process, and funding that may be required for an in-depth analysis of potential land uses at the Langley Regional Airport, including but not necessarily limited to. And I think that's the important thing here, is that this initial CPC discussion here is to get as much information as we can from this next hour, but the purpose of the motion in its entirety is to get an idea from staff on what costs, what timeline, and what exactly the land use study would look like and what it would cover. So hearing the comments last meeting, and they were well taken, that we want to get as much information on this before we make any final decisions, I absolutely fully agree. That's why the motion was worded as such, so that we can move forward and get more information before we have any kind of final decisions made whatsoever. Even before we do any planning and any decision making, obviously we'd be going to the public for future discussion. So this is the, for me, first step to get there. So the first sub-clause, but that is included in that, is a review of current and future land use. And so going to this kind of gives you an idea of the pieces of the puzzle that I would expect to come back to us as being covered in this. So what I've kind of circled there, that's not a circle, polygoned there, I'll say, is the currently undeveloped portion of the airport. I apologize, that's not in square feet. Even though I'm on the younger side, I don't even know what 48,000 square meters actually means in square footage. But there is a sizable portion of the airport there that has remained vacant for various reasons. You have several industrial uses on the north side along 56th there. You have industrial and office uses on the southeast side. And then you have the recreational hangars kind of in the central part of the airport. So for me, the current and future land use review would include all of those, because for me, I think that we need to make sure that as we grow the industrial base of the airport, we're still recognizing that there's a significant recreational base at the airport that deserves to be heard, deserves to have their voices in the conversation. And I think at the end of the day, Langley Regional Airport is a recreational airport, and I think that that needs to be an important part of the conversation. So that's why that clause was included. Second is a review and potential update to the land leasing model with a review of the ideal long-term tenant mix with the greatest economic return. Now, I know that this that clause might kind of scare some folks, but for me, this really comes down to the fact that we have an asset here in the regional airport that is one of a kind. Not one of a kind, but it is very unique, and not many municipalities can have an asset like this. And I think that in order to ensure its long-term feasibility, its long-term survival, it needs to be an asset that is self-preserved. And I think that we can get there if we have a substantial review of the tenants that we have there, the great successes that we can build on. And I think that that needs to be a significant part of this review, and how we can get to the point where the airport is reinvesting in itself on an ongoing and meaningful basis. And I wanted to kind of draw people's attention to these two pages within this past year's budget and 5-year financial plan. So on the left, you have obviously the 2023 operating budget for the airport based on its 2022 budget. And you can see, I think if everybody could see my cursor moving here, total revenue and total expenses, they equalize. The airport breaks even at the moment. The two ways that the airport generates its significant revenue are through the land leases and through sales of gas to the pilots. Now, I think that, in my opinion, there needs to be a study on how we can make this the most fair arrangement possible, and how we can make sure that this line item down here, where you see transfer to own funds, can be what is needed to service the airport on an ongoing basis. Now, we all know that there are several capital projects that are coming up for the airport that are critical to its sustainability, runway, several different equipment pieces, all these different things. They have to be paid somehow. And I think that if we have the land base to be able to pay for it, and the user groups that can pay for it, those should be the first port of call to look at. As you can see, I didn't want to do that, I want to go there. As you can see on the right-hand side here, transfer to the airport reserve. Last year was $121,000. That is great to see, because as we fill that airport reserve can be used to pay for future airport projects. And I think that that's where we need to really focus our attention. And I would hope that as part of the review process and as part of the entire planning process, we can come up with a long-term sustainable way to make sure that that airport reserve is where it needs to be. An evaluation of the airport's potential effect on adjacent community plans. There always has to be at least one typo in a presentation, so that's my mulligan. What you see here is the future Surrey Langley SkyTrain extension. In orange or red, as a colorblind counselor, I'm not too sure. You see the Willowbrook Community Plan area highlighted there. And the Langley Township stop will be located effectively where the white spot is, at the corner there of 196 and Fraser Highway. And so this Willowbrook Community Plan is undergoing a planning process right now as we speak. And it is a significant piece of Langley's planning future, in my opinion. It will be immediately adjacent to a multi-billion-dollar transit infrastructure project, and I think that we need to be proactive in making sure that we can realize the greatest return on that investment possible for Langley's taxpayers. So right now, as it stands, the Langley Regional Airport is governed, as most, if not all, federal airports are, by airport zoning regulations. I'll refer to those as AZRs moving forward. And so those AZRs impact the developability of areas within the area of approach of the airport. And so Willowbrook Community Plan is effectively entirely guided or impacted by those AZRs. And so as of right now, you effectively cannot build greater than a 6-story building in Willowbrook. Now, as a planner, I have difficulty rationalizing a 6-story building next to a SkyTrain station in perpetuity. And so for me, I want to look at all possible avenues to make sure that we can retain the airport as an airport while making sure that we can realize the full potential of Willowbrook, because I did a bit of math, and this is just an example of the type of opportunity that we'd be leaving on the table. So previous this term, we had on our table an application at 197 and 64th for a 6-story mixed-use building that came in at about 133 units per acre, or UPA. And so assuming that that would be the highest and best use that we could realize throughout the Willowbrook Community Plan moving forward, the remaining developable lands within the Willowbrook Community Plan, taking away the industrial, taking away current developed residential area, is about 250 acres. And so if you multiply 250 acres by 133 units, you get about 33,000 units, which you can see here. Now, if we calculate the amount of community amenity contributions that you would get based on our current policy from that number of units, 384 million. And then the residential DCCs, and this is just residential DCCs, this does not count TransLink, this does not count commercial, this does not count school. This is purely the residential DCC component, about $900 million. Now, assuming that the 250 UPA would be coming into play, and to give some idea, we recently saw those 2 applications on Willowbrook Drive, which are of a significant density increase. Those average out at about 360 units per acre. In my calculation here, I've only done about 250. So you can see the discrepancy there, and you can potentially imagine how much more benefit to the taxpayer there would be. So if you assumed 250 UPA across the 250 acres left in Willowbrook, it's about 63,000 units, 565 million in CACs, and over $1.6 billion in residential DCCs. And you can see the difference just there in the amount of community benefit that we would not realize if there's no discussion about the impact of the AZR. And you can only imagine what $181 million in community amenity contributions can do. It's a lot of fire halls, that's a lot of schools. No, schools are DCCs, I apologize. That is a lot of community benefit. That's a community center right there, which we all know Willowbrook is going to need regardless of what level of density it builds out. So I wanted to kind of get those figures into people's minds because we need to have the discussion, we need to be proactive about it, and we need to find a way to make sure that we can retain a valuable asset that is a community asset first and foremost, while also making sure that we are doing our due diligence in planning moving forward. The 4th clause within the therefores was that other items that may be appropriate for council to consider to maximize the ongoing community benefit for the Township of Langley's residents and taxpayers. And that is left, vague enough for people's biggest and best and brightest ideas on what role the airport can play, what role the airport should continue to play, and what uses, amenities, institutions could play a role at CUINJ. So that was the little presentation that I had put together just to give people a bit of a visual aid. Always happy to answer any questions, always happy to add or remove what people think is appropriate. And so I'll pass it back to you, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Backen, I wonder if you could answer a couple of questions first. Number one, there is a report, a memorandum, that's been distributed to council that includes a report as attachment A that apparently was prepared by Nielsen Strategies in September of 2023. So this motion that we've got here was directing the preparation of a report when in fact the report has actually been prepared.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Somewhat. Perhaps I can just illuminate the situations a little bit. You may recall from the budget processes, we were generally directed to look at all opportunities for revenues and expenses, that is, increasing revenues and reducing expenses. Through that process, we've been fairly diligent going throughout the organization trying to achieve some of those savings. It was at that time, it was thought it would be helpful to have a review of the, I guess, parameters that exist at the airport now in terms of what it looks like. And that really stems from the fact there traditionally is two different models in terms of what people think about when they think about the airport. One model is to think of it as being a bit of a utility or authority. That is something that's self-funded and pays for itself. The other is to think of it much more like a facility, a recreation center, or economic development center, where there may be some provision of support for that, financial support for that, because of the economic and recreational spin-offs that therefore occur in and around that. So there's that philosophical issue, and as well there is the land use issue that Councillor Pratt has talked about in terms of the implications that it may have elsewhere in the community. We have done no work in regards to the land use implications. I shouldn't say no work, but very little work in regards to that. Our moving forward was based on the budget, I guess, overall conversation as to how we could actually look at some of the options in terms of the airport to meet either one of those two models. And what you have before you then is that memo was actually an update from staff as to where we're at with that process, and it was there primarily and to I guess, prepare for the next budget cycle. I would also add to that, however, that the overlap between that and the land use is fairly minimal. The land use is referenced in item 2 of the resolution. That's probably the land use is referenced in items 1, 3, and 4, not in item 2 of the resolution. And item 2 is where staff have been focusing. Our purpose for bringing that forward was so council has a full package of the information that staff actually presently has, which is somewhat limited, but it's a start, and to see what council's interest is in terms of how we should go further forward with this, if that's really the direction at all. And that's really for council to determine amongst its priorities, as there are, of course, several priorities that have to be addressed. So through this process, we're trying to provide council with the best information that we have, which, as you can see, is only preliminary. And then if council wishes to prioritize this as an item that we should proceed with to get the parameters of that review, and as was referenced, one item is land use, but in the consultant's report that we have that's taken us partway so far, we have some other options that council could discuss, and it could be something that's discussed here or at subsequent meetings, depending upon the will of council.
Okay. So this report that's in the council package, is it public knowledge? Was it shared with the tenants at the airport?
Not until this meeting, because council would have to receive it first before we were able to publish it.
Okay, and have the tenants had any input into this report?
Not so far, because again, it's a preliminary, directional report, which their input would always be welcome, but if the input or direction from council was not to proceed any further, it would therefore be redundant.
Okay, because it says here quite clearly in the memorandum, second paragraph, it is now proposed the value for the structures and land has been realized by both parties, and that potentially the airport begin to assume the structures, move to a land and building lease structure, and in future lease the properties as per market conditions. That strikes me as something that we should really be getting tenant input on. The other thing that's in this report that is a review to determine if the operation of the Langley Regional Airport should be converted to rotary wing aircraft focus only. Again, I think that's something that the tenants need to have input on. So I'm wondering if staff could walk us through this report, because I'm assuming that the people in the audience are tenants and they're probably very interested in what the report has to say.
So just being mindful of the time, Madam Chair, what I'll do is try to take us through the higher level elements of it, and as well the conversation about rotary wing versus fixed wing. So as we begin with the evaluation, it's a bit tricky to understand, but when the airport was first, commercialized, the management of the day was very astute and decided that we could reduce our expenses by taking advantage of some revenue opportunities. those revenue opportunities were effectively to lease land on a bare land basis. And I'll use an illustration, and it's only an illustration, that it would be 50 cents a square foot. Those leases tended to be for a number of years, some as low as 20, some as high as 50 years. And the purpose of that was to allow the people that put the buildings up to have a really good lifespan for their buildings, and as well a recovery period, so they could recover their investment in terms of putting up the building. What was contemplated in the original models but never followed up on, and may never be followed up on if that's council's direction, but is something that we have to make a decision on, is what happens at the end of those terms as they come due. And technically, from a legal perspective, and that's not the only part of this that must be considered, there's also policy issues, but technically, from a legal perspective, when a lease is at its end, then the building and the land underneath it reverts to the township. So that provides the township with the opportunity to actually release the buildings if they have a usable life, but that could be, if council so directed, at the valuation of the building itself. So instead of being at 50 cents a square foot, maybe $15 a square foot for the building size. That effectively is the economic opportunity that exists, but that has not been fully explored yet, other than by trying to make sure we have a list or understanding of all of the leases and mechanics that are presently in place. And by my recollection, I think there's 54 such leases, but that does not necessarily include all of the recreational uses that may actually be in place. Now, that's the revenue side. The other question then comes into, well, what about some of the expense side? And Madam Chair, you referenced rotary wing versus fixed wing. That is a discussion point that's an important one, because what we do see is that if we're looking at the expense side, having fixed wing aircraft is certainly a noble initiative, but it is something that adds to the cost, as we have 2 runways. And as was referenced previously, one of the major costs we're facing is replacement of one of the runways. When I say replacement, resurfacing, it's a significant value. We have traditionally had some requests for grants to the provincial and federal governments, and we have had some success, but never enough to actually replace an entire runway. So that's something that remains out there. So one of the pragmatic options, and it may not be something that's desirable, but one of the pragmatic options, of course, then would be, well, if you don't have the resources or choose from a policy perspective not to proceed with replacing a runway, what are some of the options? Well, that would include then restricting use to rotary wing on 1 or 2 of the sections. That's very theoretical at this point in terms of what that would look like, and I'm not sure in terms of how the functionality and utilization of the airport would be if it was restricted to simply one of those 2 uses. That's something that would be worthy of further study if that's a direction council wish to go on, and it may not be, and that's one of the reasons why the information to date is provided, and it's for council then to determine, if they so choose, to advise us in terms of which elements we should look at, or maybe take away and reflect upon to determine what it is that we're trying to achieve through this process.
Okay, now I also note in this report on page 10, there is reference here to a workshop session in mid-November. Will the tenants be invited to that workshop session?
Again, that would be the decision of council in terms of what proceeds. I think it would have some merit. The challenge is going to be if council either rejects the concept of one of the elements we've talked about, which is either being the land use plan, raising revenue, decreasing expenses, changing priorities, because this may not be a priority given our rather heavy workload elsewhere. We can do that. So if that initiative proceeds, that would be council's decision to determine what that should look like. And it may be that a broader public consultation process should be invoked if that is the direction we're going.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm glad you clarified that, because I was a little concerned about jumping into the options that are listed here on page 3 without having had that workshop and without having had input from the tenants. So I'm thinking that we should probably look at getting the workshop done, as well as getting input from the tenants. Maybe the tenants could be participants in the workshop. But I see I have some questions here from council, so I'm going to turn the floor over to, I believe Mayor Woodward is first on the list.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask about a bit of a process question to Mr. Bracken, if I may, Madam Chair. This was referred to us to discuss a report potentially getting generated, but we have a report already generated, which I think has created some assumptions of what maybe council's up to. Council was simply up to wanting to consider a report, but we already have the report. So maybe you could go through that again, why this report is here when no one asked for it.
So again, Madam Chair, council does have a report, but it's a very much an incomplete report based on the motion that's actually before council. The report was generated primarily to focus on the economic activities and opportunities of the airport at actual self. And this goes back from our previous 2023 budget discussions in terms of there was a general direction, not specific, but general direction to make sure that we look at all opportunities for raising revenue and reducing expenses. The report that you have before you is a part historical, part capturing some of the background of this. It's something that has not been published other than through the Council Priorities Committee workshop session, and deals, as I say, with item B2 on the agenda partially. The broader land use issues are still something that ought to be addressed, I guess, from the economic perspective, but also from the land use perspective, that could actually have in Willowbrook and Willoughby, and as well over the city itself, over Langley City itself. That's something that is also part of the issue that's before council.
Yeah, so I think there's two reports, just to clarify. There's the feasibility report, which seems pretty helpful information, pretty third party. It's this memo, which is summarizing options 1, 2, and 3, which is a bit concerning. Like, why would there be options presented to council prior to CPC being discussed?
Madam Chair, I think the purpose of it is to stimulate discussion, so the options are not intended to be exhaustive or conclusive, but to have a starting point for some of the discussions that were underway, especially in light of some of the information that was beginning to develop since the process began. So it's there really to prompt some discussion, and is not even in the form of a recommendation, I guess would be the best way of putting it. That's why it's simply in the form of a memo, and these are things that council could consider as opposed to any recommended options or any recommended direction at this point until council has had a chance to deliberate.
I wish council had had the chance to deliberate prior to that, to maybe specify what options it was interested in, which it wasn't, prior to, I think, seeing options laid out that sort of guide discussion rather than allowing what CPC is intended for, which is to allow that free-flowing discussion to determine what options we may want to look at, which reports we may want to commission, and which reports we may not want to. I think it's set an expectation that something's going on that isn't going on. So I apologize for that. No one I know of is considering closing the airport, which I've had to correct multiple times. I think Councillor Pratt's overview sort of summarized that. I think it's helpful to look at the context in which the airport exists today versus 20 to 25 years ago. When I actually went there and got my private pilot's license at 0119, when I was in high school across the street at LSS. So the idea that some of us don't understand what the airport is or don't value it as part of Langley's history, Langley's identity, isn't true, because I certainly do. I was there as a teenager learning to fly. So the problem is that when we see these kinds of things in writing, they can be scary, but no one's contemplating any changes to the airport that I'm aware of. The challenge is simply that we've seen with inflation and what we've seen with construction costs, we're dealing with that on any number of projects, from intersections to major road projects to recreation facilities. When I first got on council, if I recall, Councillor Richter, Councillor Ferguson, this was a $4 million project, a $3 million project, and it wasn't funded and wasn't completed, and now it's listed as a $7.5 million project. And maybe it would be appropriate to look at why that is and what some of the options are. I'm always in shock at what some of these things cost now, but this is what they apparently seem to cost. Every time I've dug into it, I've found out that is what things cost. So I want to express some concern. I really wish, maybe this report could have been left in draft form prior, released or considered after council had had a chance to weigh in on Councillor Pratt's notice of motion. That's why it was referred here, and going to maybe let others speak, but I want to confirm for everyone, we're trying to find solutions, and that's it. And that's all we're trying to do, and I think provide some context to all of Langley's residents and taxpayers that if we choose to move forward with investing in the airport, that they're aware of it and they understand it and they see the benefits and see the costs, because there are going to be some costs given inflation and construction and some of the capital needs at the airport. So I think that was all the intent that I saw, which is why I supported the referral to here. We had a notice of motion early in the term, which was voted down. We had this one come forward in a slightly downgraded or downscaled version, which was referred here for discussion. I think options about helipads or reverting to the federal government are premature. And I wish they hadn't been presented here. Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I guess we try to do the best we can, if I may. To staff, you mentioned the word part general and part specific. Maybe the clerk can specify or clarify, when we give a specific, I mean, we got this from a workshop we had on Monday, last Monday for about 5 hours. When we give a specific motion to council, is that merely general, if I may, through the chair?
Tobacco?
I'm not quite sure of the question.
Okay, so what I mean, you indicated to the mayor at the time, a few minutes ago, that you were given some direction, general direction, to work on budgetary offers, items generally. But council made a specific motion to direct something to the CPC. Is there a difference between something being general and something being specific?
I guess the short answer is yes, there are two different resolutions or two different directions or two different considerations, however we want to call it. They may be the same or they can be slightly different. They can be proceeding concurrently or be proceeding independently. And I think your position is, well, should staff advise council, and I know you agree with this, should staff be advising council of the work in progress if there's concurrent things that are actually going on? And I think the answer is yes, and that's what they're trying to do in this process. The question then comes about, though, what direction does council wish to provide? So in this example, it was referred, and in part, I think the referral was processed well in terms of the intention of the mover and the seconder, and as well by the party that moved the referral, and as well the background information that does touch upon one of the points. So it's actually in the realm of council's considerations if they choose to provide any further direction.
Okay, well, I can't change history. I just hope in the future, if I mean, maybe I'm just speaking on behalf of myself, I hope in the future when we make something specific by way of motion, moved and second and voted on, that we go by that motion rather than go and finding something else on our desk that we didn't vote on. That's my point. So I'm not going to argue with those powers that be. Oh, I wanted to also point out there's a lot of young people in the audience, so a little history here. Is that a number of years ago, wasn't that long ago, I was up in an airplane by a former mayor, Mayor Beals, wasn't that long ago, and his airplane Golf Alpha Quebec, and we left one of the run 0119 and proceeded over Langley, and some of you folks might be pilots in the audience, most people probably aren't, and the aircraft was losing power. And I believe he didn't tell me, Mayor Beals, but I think we glided into the into the runway there, and it went right to Don Nichols' shop for repairs. That's all I can tell you. Okay, but anyway, you'll notice on that there's one of the roads there is John Beals Way. I don't know why he called it that, and he always wanted his own way, John, when he was mayor. But I did want to say that when we put this notice of council process committee, it was moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Van Pop, that we wanted more information. We didn't expect a report. But having said that, I did want to ask the staff if they can. You're talking in the plan, you're talking about how ways of implementing and getting more airport capital. You're talking about landing fees and charging for landing fees, charging for higher fees for airport maintenance. You're talking about airport leases. And you're talking about tenants that are expired. There's an awful lot of information in this report. Have you got any idea how much you're going to be charging those that are participating at the airport today? Extra charges?
Not at all, actually, because these are conceptual items that council could consider if we're to pursue the decreasing expenses and increasing the revenues that we've been attempting to analyze. Right now, we have, as the mayor pointed out, a broad spectrum that would have to be narrowed, I think, before it was to be advancing.
Okay, so that was my idea, is if we're going to make charges or changes to the airport, you know, as Councilor Richter's even said, you know, and I guess the mayor as well, is, you know, we should at least spend a bit of time talking to those that are users. And I know it's a recreational airport. There are some commercial and industrial uses as well. But, you know, we need to sit down because things are changing. Those runway charges are changes, and fees and maintenance and other things are changing. And I'm sure that folks given an opportunity, they may indeed want to help out in some way or another. But they'd like to have some say. So I just wanted to point that out. And we were only a year into a term here, 1 year, and I didn't see Mr. Mayor or council as part of our action plans or our, you know, priorities but it may in future be. But so that was my concern, is we're moving a little bit too fast. Do we need to move? Yes, but whether this is the right time or not, I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, just wanted to add to that, Councillor Ferguson. The report is quite clear on page 9. It says the current rent paid for an airplane bay in the West Side hangars is $50 per month. The leases are triple net in nature, which means that in addition to this $50 monthly payment, tenants pay insurance, utilities, and property taxes. With these costs added, the estimated total monthly payment today is $150 per bay, and this rate compares to $450 paid by recreational aircraft tenants at other general aviation airports. I mean, this is the type of information that I really strongly believe council needs input from the tenants on, no question. Yeah. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I've never been accused of being very succinct, but I'll give it my best shot. When I got into this position, one of the first things that we all did was go through the budget process. And we went through the budget process in a time where we had everything spelled out for us line by line, and every possible capital expense we saw from now until Kingdom Come. And one of the big ones that I saw was, I think at the time it was about $7 million for a runway. And my first thought was, with all the other priorities that my colleagues here campaigned on, that we would be likely spending money on, where are we going to find the money for such a project? And in my mind, there's a very clear distinction between the recreational pilots that occupy the airport and have occupied the airport since as long as I can remember, and the industrial commercial tenants who are able to take advantage of such a unique industrial land base. There's a very, very clear distinction for me. And so this whole exercise, and the reason why I came up with the presentation was because I did not anticipate having such a thorough memo to council that none of us knew was coming. And so for me, the question about how we're going to pay for things at the airport and what impact the airport has on the surrounding communities pretty much all starts with the position of that airport should stay. It should stay available to people who are flying their planes in and out of it and who have done so for decades. And so I think that the notion that there was, an alternate agenda, it is frustrating, because I think that one of the things that has been bandied about this term so far is we've seen in some instances a lack of enough proactivity in planning, and so that's what this exercise was supposed to be. And so I think that some of that has been lost in this whole discussion, and so I'm glad we're here today having a nice, frank, open, and honest conversation about it, because I would think that in all 4 of these clauses that are a part of the actually moved main motion, every single one of them, for me, starts and ends with making sure that the people who are going to be actually impacted by any decisions have a say in the discussion from the beginning. And I think that everybody here agrees on that. So I think that that is pretty clear. I would hope it's pretty clear that there's a fair and equitable arrangement on how this airport is going to pay for itself moving forward, and that the people who have been there can stay there. So that's as simple as it was for me, and hopefully that we can move forward with the report to start to generate all these pieces of information and have the public consultation required to actually come up with the best decision possible. So I appreciate the comments from everybody around the table today, because it's moving us, I hope, in the right direction.
Whoops, Councillor Martins.
Thank you. Um, Thank you, Councillor Pratt, for bringing this forward, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation at this table. And I appreciate all the people that clearly are interested in this topic that made the time to come here today. A little bit of history, because we've heard from a couple of my other council colleagues on their personal connections in the past. I'm a graduate of Trinity Western University from a few years ago, and at the time they had the aviation program, and all the students trained out of the Langley Airport. And I, while not one of them, I certainly had the opportunity of being their passenger when necessary to put in their hours towards their certifications. I do have fond memories of it. A very good friend of mine, I found out when I did a tour of the airport museum, her picture is posted on the fence. At first I thought you meant she was physically on the fence. It was actually her picture. And she was, I believe, the first female in Western Canada to earn the top award, basically the Top Gun Award at Trinity Western for her class. So, and Maylene Fedor is her name. So there's been history made in Langley with regards to aviation. So I just need to state that. Moving to what we're discussing today, I do think it is fiscally responsible to review these things. And that's why I do appreciate that Councillor Pratt has brought this conversation forward. I do also appreciate that we need to consider all angles, and I like the idea that I heard here from the chair that we do need to include participation from the public and from the tenants. And I'm wondering if potentially we could look at a motion to this, or an amendment to this motion that includes specifically that step to include, spell it out, that we're including the tenant participation in this process. And I'm sorry, it gets a bit of a process question.
Yeah. No, and that's a good one. And Mr. Back and I just would like to ask you, we're not voting on this motion. We can vote to refer it back to council. We can vote, can we put a motion forward today that we receive this report? And no, can we put a motion forward that we ask council to receive the report and make it public?
The document is now public because it's on the Council Parties Committee agenda. My nodding was in regards to the motion before council is the motion that was referred to CPC. So we have that motion the council would be recommending back, that the committee be recommending back to council. And there may be a wish to add a fifth element, which was to include or to design an element of public participation or airport participation in any of the matters going forward.
Okay.
Do you require a motion for that?
I
Now?
believe we do.
Yep.
Do we need to move the original motion, or is it already live? I guess that's the question.
We require a motion that would be that the committee recommends the original motion and the additional number 5 that we would be adding regarding public or airport input back to council, so council could then discuss it at the next meeting.
Okay, I would like to move that.
Just a second.
Yeah.
The committee recommends the report?
Well, the committee would recommend that council adopt.
Consider the report?
Just a 1 to 4.
It's just 1 to 4. We don't need, council doesn't need to, the report itself does not need to be received. It's already been received. So you would just be recommending the motion back to council.
Do we have to recommend it back to council? Because honestly, the motion I don't particularly like.
No, you could send a different motion back to council. You could recraft it, send a different one. This motion is essentially finished at council. So
Okay.
if you would like to, we'd send another motion or this motion or on a changed motion, whichever you'd like to recommend back to council.
Okay. Can you hold that motion thought? Because I agree with that one. Or Mayor Woodward, sorry. You're next.
I'm sorry, it actually comes up, Councillor Van Top, as Mayor Woodward's already spoken,
Okay,
so,
all
thank you.
right.
Sorry, I'll withdraw for now until the amendment's on the table.
So that would be Mayor Woodward next, please.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll also wait till there's a motion on the floor.
Okay. And Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I also, before I wait for the motion on the floor, I also wanted to ask another procedural question. Had we not had this motion being passed prior to the council Priorities Commission, it was referred, at the time, September 11th, I believe. That would have meant, if I may procedurally, that would have meant it was just proceeded accordingly without this CPC and without any input from the residents here today. Would that be correct?
Partially correct. It would have meant that the items 1 to 4 would have been processed, and flowing from that would then be further council discussion and perhaps a recommendation for further input. It would depend entirely in terms of how items 1 to 4 were processed. And as I mentioned before, right now we processed maybe a portion of item number 2 only.
Yeah, and I appreciate Councillor Pratt has been giving an explanation. Certainly, I have a little bit better understanding how it works. I think it's also important that myself, other members of council, and the members of the public can see what we're up to regarding the airport. So it was a good idea, and it ended up being a good procedure here to go through the council process committee. Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Backen, back to you. If we wanted to put a motion forward, I think that this is premature, what's here right now, because there hasn't been input from the tenants on it. So can we make a motion that the committee recommends to council that the tenants be consulted on the contents of the memorandum to the council process committee sent October 23rd, 23?
Yes, it could, but I'd suggest a slight variation because
Okay.
you don't actually have a report. We have a memo that's really a work in progress in terms of the work to date. The discussion here today, and as well the items 1 to 4 or 5, if there's public participation added, would then actually provide direction in terms of what that report should be framed to look at. And at that point, in the preparation of that report, council should likely see it first and then go for public consultation. So the addition of the 5th point to craft an appropriate process for public consultation would mean council would then see items 1 to 4 plus 5 and then go to the public when there's a complete actual report that deals with the discussion here today.
Okay, well, this is where I'm getting a little confused because it says quite clearly, attachment A, Langley Regional Airport, financial sustainability of the airport, September 2023 report in big letters.
Thank you. So that is the consultant's report to staff, not to council. That's why it's covered by a memo that actually indicates that this is where the work in progress is to date. So council can provide their direction, such as item 1 to 4, 1 to 5, in terms of how they'd like this to proceed. If it was to proceed, council could, as you say, could decide simply to not pass something from this and the matter would be at an end.
Okay, but all of the things that are touched on in the motion that's on our agenda are addressed in this report.
Only part of number 2, 1, 3, and 4 are at best peripherally addressed. There hasn't been the land use analysis, the impact analysis on development areas, those things that still have to be entertained.
All right. So what is your suggestion then? That we refer this motion back to council and recommend that a public input opportunity be developed?
I think that what you would, if we're going back to the original discussion, I think it would be that it might be referred to council and that council endorse 1 to 4, and we'd add a 5, and that staff also develop the appropriate public input model for consideration going forward.
Okay, but the issue that I have is 1 to 4 is not generic. There's a report on it.
Again, sorry, there is a report on part of number 2 in terms of the economic analysis, but current and future land use isn't addressed. An evaluation of the airport's potential effect on adjacent community plans is not addressed, nor is the other items appropriate, that last catch-all phrase. We've only focused on what would really be something be geared toward a budget analysis, which I'm hearing council wants to broaden.
Okay. All right, so what you're saying is we add a 5th one to this, which was Councillor Martin's motion, and then we endorse this whole plan?
So, it would simply be to refer it back to council, so.
No, refer it back to council, okay.
Ms.
that I
Bauer can
live
provide
with.
the language again, perhaps
Okay.
it'd be worthwhile, Ms. Bauer.
As the motion hasn't been moved, we can include it all in one. So we would be referring the motion back to staff, or back to council, so that council can direct staff to do as they're supposed to do, I guess. And then we would also include at number 5 without an amendment, as it hasn't been moved, so we would just move it with the amendment for number 5 to include the public participation.
Okay. Would you like to make that motion, Councillor Martins?
Yes, please.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Martins. Is there a seconder? Councillor Bailey seconds. All right. Any discussion on the motion? Okay. Councillor Van Popta.
Yeah, I too value public input, but it's just a matter of a bit of process when I look at other projects. We usually, in the context of this report, I don't know how we could run them tandem. We usually have something to present to the public for them to give feedback on. So I was just wondering if there's a benefit to adding language that this is done once we've done items 1, 2, 3, and 4. Because right now it sounds just too vague, like what are we going to public input for? Usually we have something to present to the public for them to give feedback on, is my only point, so.
Well, I think there's lots in this report to get public feedback on.
Yeah, but their items 1, 2, and 4 would also have information for them to have feedback on. It's not just the financial component. I want feedback on all 4 items, and at this point, they only have information on item 2. So I would like to just move it that after we've got items 1, 2, 3, and 4 all done, that we go to the public for their input, because we're presenting them with something to give input on. Right now, it's just kind of like what are they giving input on,
Okay.
other than the second report?
Okay, so you're making an amendment then?
Well, I would just like to well, I don't know how you make, we can't make an amendment to an
Madam
amendment.
Chair, if I could interject, I understood the mover, and we'll have to verify this, intended that the public participation occur after there was some documentation or report for items 1 to 4. It may be as simple as simply stating that that the public participation program occur following completion of items 1 to 4. The public participation model be developed and occur, something like that Ms. Bauer could probably clean the language up on.
Yeah, no, and I'm fine with that. That's what I was hoping for, but I didn't get it based on how it was currently worded. So that's exactly what I was looking for as well.
And Councillor Martins, are you in agreement with that? Oh, wait. I think I can maybe make that work for you. No, maybe I can't.
I can just speak loudly.
Okay, can we get Councillor Martins' microphone on, please? Thanks.
Got it. Thank you. Actually, no, that wasn't my intent. I think it needs to happen at the same time. I think there's lots of examples across our region where there is public process unfolding while we'd be going through the steps of this review. And I actually think it's a more valuable process if we're doing it at the same time. And as there we go. I've said enough. But that's how I feel.
Okay. Councillor Van Popta, back to you then.
Nope.
So do you want to make a formal amendment? Because it sounds like the intent is quite clear of what,
I'm not sure I can
The
make an
motion.
amendment on an amendment.
you can't? No?
There is no amendment. We just have the main motion at this time.
Can I have the wording of the main motion, please?
The main motion is 1 to 4.
1 to 4.
Yeah,
Okay.
plus an additional 5 for the public participation, which, as I understand it, you would like to place an amendment so that the public participation would occur after information on numbers 1 through 4 was available.
Correct.
Okay, so you're saying after the report is done, okay? And is there a seconder to Councillor Van Popta's motion? Seconder? Okay.
Seconded for discussion.
Councillor Pratt? Okay, so I'm going to have to clear the queue here, I think.
Actually, no, I'll
No?
just open up the secondary motion.
Okay,
There we go.
so okay, Councillor Pratt wants to speak to the
Yeah,
secondary.
thank you, Madam Chair. So the actual language of the therefore be it resolved clause directs staff to report to council on a potential timeline, process, and funding for what is now 1 to 5. So my understanding would be that if this is referred back to council and council approves the referred motion with items 1 to 5, the only action item from that we would be receiving is a report that details what the public engagement is going to look like, what the other 3 or how the other 4 items may be addressed. That piece will occur prior to any public engagement, because we don't need public engagement on the report on how we're going to do public engagement. once we have the report on what it's going to cost to do the engagement, what that engagement's going to look like, what's the topic of the engagement, then we will be able to decide then in what time frame we want either to occur, before, after, or simultaneously. So I think right now, the language as it was originally moved by Councillor Martins and Councillor Richter,
No, Councillor
or Councillor Van
Bailey. Councillor
Bailey, I think that language does exactly what we want for now, because then at a future date, once we get this report that details exactly how the whole process is going to look, then we decide when something is going to happen and when it's not. So I seconded it for discussion. I don't support the amendment because I think this, with item number 5, actually achieves what the motion is supposed to achieve.
Okay. Any other discussion on the amendment? Oh, Councillor Ferguson.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I guess it gets confusing, all this procedural stuff. I'm not sure if Councillor Martin wanted just something like a workshop where some of the airport users could sit down with staff and talk about airport issues and some of the very things that came up in this memo, not report, memo, and discuss some of them and see what they think, because the public input was mentioned. I'm not sure if a current and future land use, well, I mean, that could take a long time before you get to the public. It's just, I mean, you look at how long Brookfield Fernridge took. I mean, the future land use. So I had some problems initially with it. Now I'm getting more problems. I just think maybe just something like a workshop with the users and use some of the information. This is not things that we don't already know that's in this report. They took a cookie cutter of our current plans and current budgets and things like that and went from there. So I'm not sure where we're at right now, but I think more of a workshop makes sense with me. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Van Popta.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if it's possible, but I'd actually like to withdraw the amendment, only because now that I hear Councillor Pratt's, my amendment would be on something that I was actually already presented. The way that this is worded, and I agree with him, the intent is, would we even do this with all of these items on there? We're looking for a potential, we're looking for a potential timeline, process, and funding that may be required. So we're asking for a report on these items, not the contents of these items. Is that correct? Okay, that's what I'm understanding. So we're not asking for these reports yet. We're asking for how to do these reports.
Councillor Martins.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Ferguson, you were asking what was in my mind on this one. So just to respond to that, I have difficulty with proposing a workshop where we invite certain users or user groups. I feel that might potentially be limiting. There might be people who actually have an interest in the airport that are not reached out to if we do it that way, and that is why I feel it's important that we need to give equal opportunity to anybody who might actually have a vested interest in this, personally, financially, what have you. So just to be clear, I'm not interested in that. I don't think that is the best way to go about getting public input. But I'm happy with what we're discussing. I'm not clear if we're still looking at an amendment to what I proposed. I wouldn't mind some clarity.
The amendment's still on the table.
Okay.
So I'm going to call, we're getting close to time, I'm going to call the question on the amendment. So all those in favor of the amendment, and maybe, Madam Clerk, can you read back the amendment?
The amendment as is presented in the agenda with the motion with 1 through 4, and then we've added a 5th to include public participation.
Yes, but Councillor Pratt or
Oh, I'm
Councillor
sorry.
Van Popta and
Sorry.
Councillor.
I got lost.
Yeah.
Councillor Van Popta was changing the amendment or amending it so that the public participation would come after 1 through 4.
Yeah,
Correct.
okay. So that's the question. Do you want public participation after or concurrent? If you want it after, vote in favor. If you want it concurrent, vote oppose.
That is defeated with all council voting against.
Okay, so we're going now to the main motion, which is 1 to 4 plus 5 added in. This is what was moved by Councillor Martins and Councillor Bailey. Do we need to have it reread, or are you ready for the vote on this one?
Mayor Woodward is waiting to speak first.
Mayor Woodward, sorry. Yes, okay.
Yeah, thanks. So I think we'll get this back to the council table. Maybe have some other ideas over the next couple of weeks. So I'd encourage everybody to keep an eye on the issue. I think that we'll clarify concurrent versus before. I heard the word concurrent with this. I think it's important for council to weigh in and get input before anything gets underway. I think that would certainly be my intent, so I don't agree with the sentiment for concurrent. So we'll get that clarified at the next council meeting. I'll give councilors a couple of weeks to adjust this report. If anybody wants to email me or all of council, please do so. That'll help inform the conversation. I like the idea of public input of many forms, from open houses to emails, but also a workshop might be helpful for me, and I'll speak for myself, helpful for me to understand a bit more about how the airport is operating, and some concerns maybe will emerge from a good discussion, maybe to really have a look at the airport's long-term future and maybe improve what's happening there by educating us a bit more about some of the concerns, some of the day-to-day issues that we may not be aware of. We have a lot of facilities, including this one, where it's difficult and challenging sometimes for councillors to be available, myself included, to know every aspect of what's going on day to day. So it can be very helpful to hear directly from everyone about some of those details. And I can certainly learn a lot more about the airport. There's a number of concerns, I think, about existing land use deals. I think Councillor Pratt highlighted that do not apply to recreational uses or apply to some of the other individuals that have benefited greatly from the airport at taxpayer expense potentially. So there's things to, I think, for council to consider, council to look at, and I look forward to those, and really appreciate the discussion here today. And do feel that I want to apologize again. Some of the items in the report I think are premature, and if anybody feels like it was a done deal, because maybe that's been our history in the township prior, that if something became public, it was already decided. I can assure you we do not govern that way, and we're really interested in all the feedback before any decisions are made. So I really want to stress that this really is a sincere engagement and conversation, and I think the status quo is the prevailing situation, given the airport and that it's owned by the federal government. If we were to, there's no closing of the airport, that's not really an option. It reverts back into the agricultural land reserve, which I think we have a lot of that. So I think that there really is a preference and a desire to find a way to help the airport and keep it going, and I hope that's come across here today. So that's all I have, Madam Chair, and appreciate the discussion here today.
Yes, thank you, but I still don't think it's appropriate to hammer on previous councils. It's not necessary. Councillor Bailey?
Yeah, I'm going to mention something. I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but there's a real unique usage that isn't really talked about. It would fall under the land leasing and potential update. But one thing that I really would like to make sure is included, and that would be the museum. That is a very unique usage of airport. I've gone through that a couple times, including with my grandkids who love that place. And I would really like to see if it can be included in there, some of the possibilities of dealing with the museum, because I know there are problems for them right now because of their lease situation. So if it's appropriate, if we can include a discussion about, under whichever one of these ones you want, some potential usage for the museum, because it apparently showed up as one of the top two things in Langley that are of local interest and that kind of stuff. And I've talked to them a couple of times, and yeah, I love what they're doing, and I just want to make sure they're included in any plans. And we can move this thing forward so we can have a permanent museum that accommodates our use.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. You should probably bring that up when the report goes back to council. I'd also like to add in the whole concept of emergency air support, such as was provided out of Langley during the Abbotsford Atmospheric River climate event not that long ago. That's an important use of the airport as well. Okay, so Mr. Backen, I just want to make sure that this report that is in council's hands, anybody who's here today and is interested in reading it can access the report? Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to call the question. I don't see any other speakers on the list. So all those in favor of the motion 1 to 4 plus 5, going back to council. And that carries unanimously. All right, on that note, we're at the end of our agenda. Could I have a motion to terminate? Councillor Pratt and Councillor Martins. All those in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you again for coming out today and showing your support for the airport.